Good morning, dearest friends. Good night of Shabbos. It is the 22nd of Adar days, March 25th, Friday. We're here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Currently, Maseches Shabbos, chapter 14. We are 109b, and hopefully today to be on 110a. We're making good ground. We are still in a segment that's talking about the halachic relevance or the halachic discussion about remedies on Shabbos. I know I keep on saying it. Pikuach nefesh. You can do anything necessary to save a human life or to help a person be healed from mortal danger. But if that is not the case, there are Chazal restrictions, sages, there are Rabbanan restrictions on medical treatment as a result of a gzeira, lest we come to engage in grinding or breaking down stuff in a way that is prohibited for Shabbos.
Rabbi,
yes,
you asked me to remind you today about going more deeply into
pikuach. Yes. Remind me again. What was the thing that you asked me? I asked
about pikuach nefesh, about guidelines that are.
Yes. So Blina, there maybe towards the end of the class we'll and so our Gemara is talking about remedies, and the way it was introduced is a question of: are you allowed to do or consume certain foods that have medicinal value? And the long story short, although it's an oversimplification, is it depends if the item has a dual function or it is exclusively for healing. And that was the gist of it. The Mishnah mentioned certain specific food that one can't eat and foods that one may consume and drink that one may drink. And so our Gemara's first line of order of business is to identify what precisely our Mishnah is talking about. Once we mention those items, excuse me. Once we mention those items, we're also going to identify what they are, what they're used for, why they're used, as well as similar remedies or alternate treatments in the event that they do not work. And so we started talking yesterday about different liver and stomach worms, because those are treated by some of the items and substances that we mentioned in the possibly in the Mishnah, a zavyon, which was possibly, and we ended up covering a whole series of our potential, came across a series of items that sound very much like certain herbs that we are familiar with, and you might find it in a dish today, but they were also consumed then for their medicinal value and healing. Today's Gemara is going to take a turn, and we're going to be talking in a moment about snakes. Well, actually, I'm sorry, we already started talking about snakes. The last item we mentioned was that if a person drinks mayim megulim, exposed water, and there is a concern, maybe because there are symptoms or maybe because you're afraid of the onset of symptoms, that there may have been snake venom. Maybe a snake shared your cup, and maybe it is exposed, and apparently the snakes of Bavel, they would come out at night when no one was around, and they would taste all the food in the kitchen and drink from your water or wine. And so there is a treatment that is necessary. And in the close of yesterday's discussion, we talked about the use of boiling. Well, we talked about an alternative to abu roeh, which we said was that what we called purple? You see, I told I'm flunking my medical school again. Anyways, whatever that particular drink was, and so the Gemara describes that an alternate to it was that lonely staff. It was a tree that grows. The alternate to that was to boil up beer along with roses or flowers. And then we told the story about an individual lady, the mother of one of the sages of the Gemara, who actually effectively treated somebody who was exposed to toxic, deadly poison, snake venom, by making this concoction. That's where we left off yesterday. And today we're going to talk about alternate remedies for drinking water that has a little dose of snake venom, and then we're going to transition from there to talking about snakes. And Dr. Hammer, bli neder. If we can get through this, I will look for the Siman of Shulchan Aruch that talks about a chayla, even though this is not the only place, and then we'll review it briefly to get a sense of it's Shin Chav Ches. Let me actually open it now so we don't forget, and then we can share the screen and get started. So bear with me just another moment. We're going to open up Hilchos Shabbos, Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim 3:20, 28, and we'll get started. 3:28 Shin Chav Ches Din Chayla b'Shabbos. Okay, so bli neder, we'll jump into that before we close out our session, and we'll have to end a few minutes. We'll have to go to that a few minutes before the end. So here, let's get started. So here is our Gemara. I need to reformat it. So we are at the tail end of 109. We're on 109b, which, by the way, well, anyways, okay, let's see. Here is our Gemara. This is the story. Here we go. Rav Avya Amar. Rav Avya taught that Revisei de Chalva Meiza Chiverta. You know what else you could do to treat your water, your snake venom in water? You could give a quarter lug of milk that comes from a white goat. Rav Huna bar Yehuda Amar Laisi Esroiga Chalisa. Bring an esrig that is matok, sweet, says Rashi. V'lechake v'lemalye duvsha. Char it and fill it up with honey, or rather, I'm sorry, make Rashi. Lechake legave yachik b'seichach. Okay, so carve out a hole. V'lemalye duvsha. Fill it up with honey. And Rashi, place it on flaming, smoldering coals. So basically, you're cooking the citron with honey, the lechle, and then eat it. And Rav Huna bar Yehuda says that this will help for venom. Now we're going to find that a very, very delicious remedy that's good for many things. You should keep some of this handy. Rabbi Chanina Omar, Rabbi Chanina taught, Mei raglayim b'nei arbayim yom, urine that is 40 days old. Rashi, sha'avru aleim mem yom, it spent 40 days waiting. Lishnachrina shal tinek ben mem yom. Alternatively, maybe it's the urine of a young child that's only 40 days old. So it does good things. You know what it does? Barzina le zibura. A very small amount. Rashi says kois katan ma'oid of shmoi barzina. A barzina worth of those meraglayim. Shoysin lemisha nishchsu tsira umisrape. If a person has to deal with a hornet's sting, a small slurp of 40-day-old urine will do the trick. However, for the next malady, you'll need a little more. Rive'esa, you'll need a revius, a quarter of a loig. Le'akbarta, if you were dealing with a help me out, akrav, with a scorpion.
Scorpion.
A scorpion, you need a higher dose. Probably because it's larger and its poison perhaps is more devastating. Palgariva, which here Rashi says is a half a log.
The problem is you always had to have 40-day-old urine on supply.
Yeah.
You always have to keep it.
That's why I told you need to put it aside. Oh, you're saying you should always save your urine for 40. Well, I don't know if it only
days,
works
and
on the 40.
And every day you have to change it, you know?
I don't know. Maybe your background in medicine maybe informs you. I don't know if it means it has to be 40 days and then it's no good, or 40 days plus.
No, but no, it's not that I don't think it's no good, but you have to keep it.
Oh, you're saying you're going to have a handy...
You always have the jar available of at least 40-day-old urine.
Well, that's what a pharmacist is for.
Right.
Well, I don't think they had pharmacists in those days, and the good thing is it didn't have to be refrigerated.
Yeah, but you also need a best before date
Yeah.
But let me ask another question. Snake venom outside of the snake biting you is dangerous
To consume.
or inert? I'm not sure. Alan should know.
Snake venom,
Yeah.
very,
Is it?
well, it all depends on the snake.
You
This
think it could be dangerous as by itself?
It all depends on what type of snake it is.
I
I
don't
thought the idea was the venom gets in the bloodstream. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
again I want to remind you, and soon I'm going to read for you some more from a collection of commentaries about what to make of these remedies. Don't do them at home. But I did Google urine as a remedy,
Yeah.
and there are some. I'm sorry, I know this is not the most appetizing segment of the Gemara, but I just want to show you. Apparently, this was a known.
Yeah.
People
Really?
are doing that today in some of those diets.
So here, the Golden Foundation is urine the miracle drug no one told you about. Man who claims that drinking 2-week-old urine is the cure for all major illnesses. So again, I'm not advocating drinking urine. Please don't get me wrong. But it is interesting that there is something in the urine that, at least at some points in human history, it was consumed. All right. Palgariva, which Rashi says is a half a lug, although I would have thought it was a quarter lug. Ligiluya.
As far as snake venom is concerned, it's still used in the modern medicine.
I'm sorry?
The snake venom is still used as medicine in modern
So here,
times.
you're right. I think
you can Google
Yes.
snake venom in medicine and you will get a lot of entries.
Right. Well, right now we're talking about being cured of snake venom, but you're right. Snake venom is used, I think, even in some of our like real farmers. Well, again, I'm not here. Anyone can share more, but I think it's used in real current research and in different treatments. So Riva. Now what about here. Palga Riva Ligaluya. Exposed water, you'll have to drink a half a lug. And Riva, a full lug, afilu lichshaf malu. It works for everything, even sorcery. So this medicine, I wish we had a better euphemism to describe it. But it could work for anything. It's really a wonderful remedy for all different kinds of problems. Okay, now we've concluded our session on the medicinal properties of aged urine in the ancient world. Amar Rav Yochanan adds anigron. Reb Menachem, anigron, isn't that a contemporary drink?
Not familiar with it.
You are or you're not?
I'm not, but that doesn't mean it. I don't know anything. Why don't we?
I thought I remember discussing
I can Google it.
Anigron, which Steinsaltz here says is water, spinach water. The avangar, and water where banagri grass was boiled. This syriaca and balsam. Malu bein ligaluya bein lachafim. So these three drinks: spinach water, banagri grass, and balsam. Those are fantastic for different hazards like venom and or sorcery. Rashi, mayim shenishlak behem banagri min esav sheshmoy banagri v'stam anigron meishal chardin. Kidamrinon anigron may the silka the tira. Okay, anyway, so we're talking about these boiled substances. I mean, I will admit that boiled spinach sounds a lot more appetizing than our previous suggestion. Just want to get you if there. So interestingly, spinach beets banagri.
And apparently in Shavuos Kavbet Amud Bet, there is anigron maya de silke.
Well, that's what we're talking about over here.
Rabbi.
it is saying that no, I'm sorry, another one. Bachos 35
Yeah, Rashi.
is a drink. It's a drink made from cooked beets.
Yeah. So we
So
learned
that, I guess there are different interpretations.
anyway.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I know you want to get away from it, but I just looked on Google today. There's a thing called urotherapy, and it's being used in the States even today.
Okay.
Well,
Drink.
I'll give you I'll up one, and I'll tell you there is even today treatments with feces, where you ingest. They treat the feces for some kinds of diseases,
I think there's such a thing as a fecal transplant.
right?
Yeah, in
Shalom da, but if it
case
helps, it helps. All right.
in case we feel we're much better today or much more intelligent, this will tell us we're not.
Why? I think there are certain enzymes or bacteria that are helpful for the digestive tract, and it's possible that a person doesn't have it for whatever reason. And so a transplant, a little fecal transplant, could do the trick. I think it's actually fairly common enough that I wouldn't be surprised if someone here or someone that knows someone that actually had it. So I don't think we should be laughing about it. But yeah.
It's all about probiotics again to put back at the.
Listen, there's a reason we pay the doctors the big bucks, because we don't want to have to think about these things. Just give me the treatment.
I think the fecal transplants are usually from a bull.
Oh, really? Very interesting. All right, let's take a look at one more story. Then I'm going to read to you some background on this idea of the Talmud's remedies. Then we'll take a look at Dr. Hammer at the Shulchan Aruch. And then if we have more time, we'll continue on this matter. So, Haiman Zebola Chivra. What if you swallow Chivya? I'm sorry. What if you swallowed a snake? So until now, we're talking about snake poison. But it's got to be a whole lot worse if you actually swallow a snake. I don't know how a person, by mistake, swallows a snake. I know there's a little old lady who swallowed a fly.
Right.
I don't know how you swallow a snake. But I remember seeing there's some studies about humans eat an average of 5 spiders in their lifetime. So basically, when you're sleeping, things can happen. And maybe in the Wild West or in a more wild area of the world, maybe it was not entirely implausible that a person could come to swallow a snake. I don't know what that snake looks like, but here I'm going to read for you what Rabbi Steinsaltz writes here. Even though it is uncommon, it is not impossible to swallow a small snake. However, Rabbi Steinsaltz, as the Gemara is most probably describing swallowing tapeworms, which is known as tinea, which is similar to a snake, and the remedies mentioned in the Gemara are indeed effective in killing a tapeworm. So good chance is we're talking about a tapeworm, but here we're describing it as a snake, and maybe takim means a snake. So let's learn how to deal with this. Loichle kishusa b'milcha, you should eat hops with salt. And then milaharte tlasamili, run around. What does the running do? I don't know, but I imagine it might speed up the metabolism or the digestive tract to rapidly cause it to do its magic. All right, does that make sense? All right, let's see another story. Rav Shimi Bar Ashi, or rather a story about this treatment. Rav Shimi Bar Ashi, Chazyela Hahu Gavra, the Bala Chivra. Shimi Bar Ashi noticed the guy, all of a sudden a snake pops in his mouth, and how do you get it out? So he needs to heal this person. So what he did is Id Milei Keparsha. He put on a costume to look like a parsha. A parsha, Rashi says, Toifsoi Umeyasroi. He grabbed him and beat him. Shapached Damerutza V'Hakeshois Mesiash and Koichai Umachmas Umechamam Umeis Hanachash Besoichai. He put on the clothing of a person who typically would have been abusive and treated him as such. I believe that's what Rashi's saying there. And along with his attempt, his show of abusing, he fed him these salty hops, and then he chased him around for the distance of 3 mil. And the snake ends up coming out of him in little chunks. indicating the effectiveness of this treatment. Let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it. He appeared as a horseman, fed him hops, and made him run around. So basically, I guess if a nice old rabbi comes, or a nice old man, or a nice yeshiva bocher comes and says, "Hey, you're gonna have to do this," the guy says, "No way, I'm not listening." But he put on this imposing, scary, terrifying persona and costume so that the guy would have no choice but to listen for the fear of his life. And ultimately, that was how he was able to give him this treatment. And Rashi adds, why was he being mean? He wasn't. The pachad, the fear, the tsittering, and the running, and the panic, and the adrenaline, or whatever, was a necessary part of the healing process. And that's why he chose to heal him in this way. Very interesting. Ikad Amri, the story is also presented with a big variation. Others say Rav Shimi bar Ashi balachibra. Others say that this rabbi is actually the person who swallowed the snake. Also, Eliyahu idmilei keparsha. Eliyahu and Navi put on the appearance of a horse rider. In Chumash, there's a word that's very similar to parsha. It says parashim, in describing the morning of Yaakov and how everyone went up to Israel. I think it describes how there was different royal folks, and I think the word parashim is used, which is probably the Hebrew word for these horse riders, which I believe were a certain type of military unit or designation. So what happened is Eliyahu Navi, in this appearance, he fed him the salty hops. He chased around this rabbi, and it caused, and the snake then fell out in these chunks. Another
Rabbi,
yes.
I just Googled getting back to the urine. The
We can't leave this. Okay.
The reason that you leave it for 40 days is that most of the water in the urine evaporates, and what's left is traces of ammonia, and that's what kills the sting.
Interesting. So the ammonia is toxic and could counteract. Very interesting.
Right. Yeah.
So I just Googled here hops, and apparently there are some remedies for hops as well. Hop salt doesn't seem to be as popular as you'd imagine from the Gemara, but all right. Haiman, another story, and we'll end with this. We'll end with this story. We'll do our other stated objectives in our study, and then we'll come back. Haiman the Tarke Chivra, a guy swallowed a snake. I'm sorry. Haiman the Tarke Chivra, a person who swallows a snake. Here's what you got to do. Leisei uvara the Chamra Chivrata. Bring a embryo of a white donkey. Velikre, tear it up. Veloisve alave, and place it on the person. Let's see, Rabbi Steinsaltz, make sure I got it right. You bit by a snake. Bring the fetus of a white donkey, tear it open. But it only works if the mother of the animal is not a treifa, which a treifa means that it's going to die. So you need a healthy mom. When you take out the embryo, or you tear the embryo and place it on the injured person. Rashi says it's the mother that can't be a treifa. So there's a story. Bar Kasha de Pumpadisa, Rashi. Mimuna lemelech v'Yisrael. In Pumpadisa, which was a semi-autonomous zone within the Persian or Iraqi Babylonian government, so they had their own semi-autonomous situation. So there was a Jewish mayor or other kind of important officer or official in Pumpadisa. He may have been a representative of the king or a local ruler. So what happens is the Tarke Chivra, he was once bitten by a snake. There were 13 white donkeys that existed in Pumpadisa. It's like, if I tell you, you have to go find a Rolls Royce. You have some Rolls Royces, but they're not that many. Maybe there's 13 in Hallandale and Hollywood. 6 of them are in the beach club. The rest of them are
one in La Mer.
One at La Mer.
One at La Mer. Okay, so we could figure it out. So a white donkey.
3 in Fort Lauderdale.
Well, actually, I'll tell you, the rest of them are in the Trump Hollywood. All right. Karino lechulu. They tried each one. They tore it up. Vishtacho treifa. None of them were kosher. I mean, not kosher. None of them. All of them had pre-existing conditions. They had comorbidities that made them not considered a treifa. And so each one of these white donkeys are not effective to treat him. So Havoy Chada, this guy has bad mazel, right? Because his treatment is at hand, and every single one of them isn't working out. So Havoy Chada Bahi Gisa de Pumbedisa. There is a river by Pumbedisa, and on the other side of the Pumbedisa River, there was another white donkey. That would be Sunny Isles. Okay. Ad the Uzli Maisile Achlari. So they sent a guy on a ferry to go pick up this white donkey so they could heal this important official, but you'll never know. In his bad mazel, a lion killed the last hope, the last donkey. And now this poor gentleman will not be able to be cured. Amrlu Abaya. So Abaya commented in regards to this story. He tells all the folks he tells Hatzalah or whoever was trying to help him, Dilma, Chivya d'Rabbanan Tarke. Is it possible that in truth, the bite he got is not a regular snake bite? It is a snake bite of the rabbis. The leisle asmasa, and it cannot be cured. A person who breaches boundaries should be bitten by a snake, and this is a verse in what's in Koheles. What does that mean, Rashi? Sha'avar al nidui chachamim. He must have transgressed against the sage's prescription. They made a nidui. And to be bitten as a consequence for rejecting the rabbi said, Ein lo refuah, cannot be healed. And therefore there is this highly improbable bad mazel that's causing all of the remedies to become ineffective. And so probably there, let me rephrase it. He's saying maybe there is something supernatural going on. Maybe it's not simply bad mazel, but maybe he did something that warranted this. And so the Gemara is going to say, yeah, actually he did. In Rebbe, they said, actually, they tell Abaya, you're right. I believe this was many years earlier. I think it would have to be many years earlier. When Rav died, Gazar of Yitzchak Bar Bisna. So it was a terrible morning for the Jewish people. And actually, I should comment, and it's appropriate. Last Friday, was it last Friday? So I think we've concluded the Shiva now for what's a great Torah scholar. They're calling him the Sar HaTorah. Certainly the greatest of the Haredi and Lithuanian world, but really the world over. Sephardim, Hasidim, everyone acknowledges and celebrated his great tzidkos and his great Torah knowledge. And so he passed away. And of course, there is a degree of mourning over the loss of a great person. And so it's appropriate that as we are marking the end of Shiva, that we have a story here about the passing of Rav. And the Chazal, in an expression of mourning for the loss of this great rabbi, they made a gzeira, the leka, the lamte, asa, the gidme libe hilula. For 1 year, they wanted the wedding celebrations to be somewhat muted. And so they said that for 1 year after the passing of Rav, no longer should they do a dance that included hadassim and palm branches. There was a special ritual bell palm branch celebration. And apparently it was a parade through the streets. And to express mourning for 1 year, they were not supposed to do this ritual. Ozal ihu amti also they give me a little bit of this guy, the Tarka, the guy who is bitten and is now unfortunately not able to find a cure, did transgress this gezerah, this decree to honor the memory of Rav. And unfortunately, Tarke Chivya he was bitten by a snake, and ultimately he perished. He died from the snake bite. Let's see, read Rashi over here. I mean, I explained this, but I want to see in Rashi's words. He said that for 1 year they should diminish the simcha. Rashi explains that they used to do is bring a myrtle, va'anfei dekalim, and palm branches, l'smoyach lefnei hachasan, bakala, and dance and march in front of the chas and kala. And when they'd bring these branches and these leaves in front of them, they would smack them together. They would do some kind of whole dance. And so they made a gzeira not to do it. Interestingly, So they were not supposed to do this. And this guy, he was a big macher, and his kids are not going to be deprived of their celebration. And so the Chazal here and the people in the town saw a correlation between this breach of the Chachamim's instruction and his tragic demise.
Rabbi,
Yes.
maybe the message is also to build a better fence.
To do what? To keep snakes out?
Yes.
Well, we don't know if he was on a hike or riding around town. If you live in regions that have snakes, you know that it's pretty hard to avoid them, because snakes, like other critters, can navigate through holes that we cannot. And so, in the time of the Gemara in this region, it seems like snakes were quite prevalent. Like, I think we
Rabbi,
could... Go ahead.
Would there be a discussion anywhere about how to determine which snakes are poisonous and are not, or there's no discussions?
I think if you lived in that region, it was obvious, but we don't have, at least not over here, an elaborate description on the poisonous or not poisonous snakes. I think the assumption here is that if you swallow a snake, even a non-poisonous snake could be quite problematic. So I believe that's the assertion.
By the way, Rabbi, it's not that ridiculous, because Chinese eat eels and all kinds of stuff. And if it's not cooked properly, you would have a tartar eel.
Yeah. Then I think
They're
there's
not
also
human.
some
They
kind
eat
of...
anything and anything.
I'm sorry?
They eat anything and anything.
What I want to show you, Tosfos. So let me ask you a question. Do you think is the Gemara saying that Hashem sent a snake to bite him? Or is the Gemara saying that unfortunately people do get bit, and as a result of his moral failing, maybe that's why the treatment was not as effective? So I don't really know the pshat, but looking into some of the commentaries, it appears that there's a desire to say more that he had a poor mazel in finding a cure, but not necessarily the snake, because people can be bitten by snakes. Others, of course, will say no. The pasuk says, nachash, and here he breached the fence. He breached an important the gezerah of the Chazal, and therefore he had this tragic consequence. I should also note that there is significance that there was a lion involved. So the Ben Yoyada that I perused through describes, and others describe, how the Chazal are sometimes called a lion, and so the entrance of a lion into the picture was a clue to what was going on over here. Chazal are very strict, are very concerned about adhering to the tekanos and the gezeros of Chazal, to the point where they would possibly draw a correlation between a breach of a societal norm established by Chazal and even very serious consequences.
Rabbi, do we know whether there's any difference between a white donkey and a donkey of?
So you're asking a good question. You're actually asking a question that leads to what I wanted to discuss. Do we suppose, is the Gemara even supposing that there's a difference to the biological makeup, let's say, of a donkey that's white versus a donkey that's dark, that's brown, or has different color hair? And so I don't know. I'll tell you why I don't know, because maybe there are two different kinds of species, which then there would be some kind of difference. But what I really want to read for you here, it's easier to read than for me to try to give you a review or an overview on what's going on over here. And the bottom line is like this. Hang on. How do these refuos work? Are we to understand the Gemara as presenting us things that worked in a pharmacy at the time? Well, some maybe, like the urine, we seem like the ammonia may actually be effective, and hops are used in medical treatment, but certainly at least some of these treatments do not have a immediate medical correlation between the properties of the given creature and and its effect. And so the understanding here is that these were kinds of remedies that worked in their time, but it didn't necessarily have an immediate. There was something, I don't really want to say spiritual or esoteric. There was something that was not entirely natural about these cures. And just looking for the article I wanted to read from you. Give me a second. Oh, so the Rashba in his Shabbas Ch says exactly what I'm saying. We cannot give you an exact reason why these remedies work. And even though we can't explain how they work, being that they had a track record of effectiveness in that region, they are considered by the Chazal as legitimate treatments. And Hashem somehow put different things in the world that we can't quite make sense. That's how he explains it. And so there are enzymes that have that interact with the human biology in a very clear and scientific way, but there are also certain things that have an effect, but it's not exactly science, more like what we call a segula. Again, how that works. Hold on. Yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi, we have exactly that today. We do not have, Alan will back me up, we don't have a cure for the common cold. So there's this thing and that thing, maybe it helps somebody, maybe not. And our attitude is take it, maybe it'll help. Even though scientifically it shows there's really no direct connection.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you something interesting here. It's brought from the Baal Shem Tov. We talked about the Baal Shem Tov. Oh, no, not here, in a different class. The Baal Shem Tov says, why is it that Hashem chooses to cure certain people with certain remedies, medicine, when Hashem could also cure the person without it? And so he says, in a Kabbalistic sense, sometimes there are nitzutzot, there are sparks that need to be elevated. And so Hashem creates a circumstance that the person needs to take such medicine. I would extrapolate and say maybe along the same lines, and this is something I know the Rebbe would tell people, is that if they had to go to the hospital, they should seek out a spiritual purpose in that trip, in addition to receiving the medical care, to kind of check off the box of, if Hashem wanted us to be in the hospital, let's try to figure out why we're here and take care of the spiritual purpose and hope that Hashem will send the refuah alongside it. So that's the explanation of the Rashba. These are not scientific. They were never scientific. They were kinds of segulot that somehow worked, and we can't explain why. Other sages say that there's something psychological about some of these treatments, where to be bitten by a certain critter, in addition to the actual medical jeopardy, it could also cause a certain panic or psychological effect. And maybe they have they do something to the body, they put into and these remedies create some kind of counterbalance to this, the emotion or the effect. So that's another perspective. Where did the Chazal get these from? So that as well is a machlokes, but most likely, many opinions are that these were medicine of the time, or there was some kind of Jewish tradition that these things worked in a esoteric, mystical kinds of way. So again, the Rambam's son, Avram ben Arambam, writes, and this is actually a famous teshuv of his. So he says, although generally speaking, you have to believe everything the Gemaras, the Chazal say, when it comes to the refuahs here, the Rambam's son says, we don't need to accept these as medical, because he says that ultimately, for actual medicine, you need to follow the science. That's what the son of the Rambam says. Others say that these teachings are nonetheless part of the Jewish oral tradition. Not that you should actually implement them, but the study of them is, of course, Torah and significant. And possibly, this is connected to a famous book of remedies that dated back to the time of King Chizkiyahu. The Gemara describes, and I think we described earlier on in our study, that there was a book that had all different kinds of remedies, and they were very effective. And Chizkiyahu hid it because people were not relying on Hashem; they were just relying on the book. Anyways, these are some of the ideas and perspectives on the matter. I need to see if there's anything else to bring up over here before we go into our last discussion for the doctor. All right, I think we're going to end with this. Now we're going to open up the Shulchan Aruch, and hopefully we'll be able to cover a little ground. Give me a thumbs up. You can see. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
It's a big siman, so I don't know if we're going to get through everything, but I just want to give a little. I want to just try to fly through it and get a little survey of what's going on over here. Person that just has a little something. It was chazek v'hoylech kibari, but he's able to manage living like a regular person. You know, have a little pain, a little, you know. Also, so this is the kind of person that does not need to have a medical. So a person has a slight, I don't know, something, but it's nothing major. But if a person has a illness that introduces sakana, mitzvah l'chalal avos Shabbos, then you are commanded. It's not just you're allowed to. It's not just that there is a license to, but it is actually a mitzvah to deseret Shabbos. The hazar is the person who is more alert and reactive, responsive. Hareza meshubach. This is praiseworthy. V'hashoyel, a person who stops to ask a shaila before desecrating Shabbos for a person that is possibly in sakana. The delay of asking the question, hareza shoyfech damim. This is spilling blood. And the Balatanya adds, Vanishal hareza meguna. The person that received the question, this is not in the text of the Shulchan Aruch, but the Balatanya adds, the person who received the question should consider this a disgrace. He should have already publicized publicly that it is entirely permissible to desecrate Shabbos, and his constituents should have never had the question. And here's the line that I want to share, Dr. Vafilu Suffolk Nefashis Doiches Shabbos. Even if it is just a suffix, you still push away Shabbos. Shenemar Asher Yasod Mechaybahem. A person observes the Torah mitzvot, V'chaybahem, to live with them. Matam Lemer V'chaybahem, again quoting the Gemara. A person needs to emerge from mitzvah observance, Torah observance, living. Not that a person should find themselves possibly in life jeopardy. Then he adds, however, when it comes to remedy, you should only use settled science, settled medicine, or rely on a medical professional. But don't just spend your time on Google giving the person all different mishigas. If you're going to be Machal Shabbos, it should be established things. Any injury. Dr. I think this may be part of what you were. So we haven't really added more than we've already discussed, but it's good to see it in the language of the Shulchan Aruch. Any internal injury, starting from the teeth, from the mouth and inwards, including a illness that affects the teeth, but that's only if there's a real wound or if a burn, I think, or boil. Person has a little boo-boo, that's not considered an injury. But if there's a gash or something serious, then you can desecrate Shabbos. He says here, but if it has to do with removing a tooth, then you should ask a Gentile. You shouldn't do it yourself. Interestingly, the Balatanya adds over here, just being a little sore, a little achy, that's not considered a wound. So pain isn't necessarily an indicator for the severity of the injury. But the Balatanya adds, but if the individual boo-boo, the individual soreness or pain causes his whole body to be becomes sick, he becomes incapacitated by the intensity of the pain. Then you can desecrate Shabbos, but it should be through a Gentile, because although the person is not, his life is not in mortal harm, but to do a full malacha, you should use a Gentile again because it's not pikuach nefesh. So if you have a pain, you should have a Gentile remove the teeth. Hi,
can I call you back in 10 minutes? No problem. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Here, two more things, and we'll call it a day. Maka she'ena shel chalal. But what if the injury is not internal? It's visible. Nish'alim bebaki. You ask a person who is an expert. So if the presumption is that it's not a mortal injury, you can still and should ask a baki, a professional. And then if they tell you that you should be mechal Shabbos, you should. Hold on 1 second. I want to read from you the Balatani here. Maka shel chala. When it comes to an internal wound, you don't need a professional. Even if there's no one to tell you, then you still are mechal Shabbos.
So question, Rabbi, if you don't
But
mind
if you
me
know that it is not a sakana, then you can wait. So basically, a lot really depends on what you know and the apparent severity. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So the question is, what happens if you don't know, it's a small cut, and it might, if you don't treat it now, it might get worse later on, but you don't know.
Well, let me ask you a question. What would you do on a weekday? That's, I think, a question that you should ask yourself. If on a weekday you wouldn't really do anything, then on Shabbos you shouldn't either, because that means you're not really worried about it.
Okay, I got you.
But again, if you think this might actually be if you're saying, oh, this might be a stroke, this might be a heart attack, this might be a how do you call it, an appendicitis, well, then those are all things that we know that could, if they're not treated, they are pikuach nefesh. Well, then yes, you should stop everything now. Don't wait, and see Michal Shabbos, because that would be a internal issue that is a suffix, and you have to Michal Shabbos. It's a little more complicated. But I hope you're getting the picture here. That at least some of the parameters for defining and figuring out. As we would go into the commentary, one more thing. An injury that the doctor says is a sakana. Even if it is purely external, as a Shabbos, you should desecrate Shabbos. What happens if you have two doctors and one says, I don't think it's a big deal, and the other says it is? You should desecrate Shabbos. Others say, no, you don't need a doctor. Any person has a little common sense and they think that it's dangerous. Suffolk nefashos lahakal. We're always going to err on the side of leniency. We're going to err on the side of desecrating Shabbos for this matter. The Rama adds that this would dafka be a Jewish person, but a Gentile that's not a background in medicine, you might not necessarily listen to them. Very interesting. The Rama adds Misha writes him la'ansai. Sheyavar avera gedayla. A person who's going to be compelled to desecrate a big avera, you don't desecrate Shabbos to save him from that individual avera. Very interesting line. Let's see if any of the commentaries weigh in over here.
Rabbi,
Yes.
if you're in the Everglades and you get bitten by, you don't know if it's a coral snake or another snake, you run fast. You run fast to the hospital, or you ask for an ambulance
Yeah,
fast.
if you don't know, you move as fast as possible. By the way, you know what they say about the two guys that were being chased by a bear, and the guy starts running, and the friend asks, "Why are you running? We'll never be able to outrun the bear." He says, "Yeah, I only need to outrun you." Which, by the way, next Gemara will be something like that. I just want to read one line here from the Mishnah Berurah. Ein Mechalin. Here he says that we don't desecrate Shabbos to help a person avoid a sin. This is a big part of the Gemara. Did we learn it? We talked about removing bread from the stove, and the Ein Oimrim La'Adam. We don't tell a person. We don't tell one person desecrate Shabbos for the other person's zechus, the other person's virtue. Even if the person is being compelled to do one of the very extreme averis of avodah zarah, gileras, and shichasam. I'm sorry. If what the person is going to be compelled to do is one of the three primary sins where a person is able to and should give up their life, and you're afraid that the victim is going to actually give up their life to avoid doing these sins, this is a sin that you do need to intervene, because your failure to intervene could lead to life, to jeopardy to his life.
So you actually have to, even on Yarek Shal Ve'al Yavo, if it's someone else's life.
Again. I'm sorry?
I said, even on Yarek Ve'al Yavo, you do the Avera in order to save someone else's life?
No. We're saying you're going to desecrate Shabbos to save the person who is going to give up their life to not do the Avera. Again, your friend is going to be compelled to do avodah zarah, and if he is going to be compelled at the threat of his life, he's going to give up his life. So your intervention is going to save his life. So it's pikuach nefesh. Possibly, he says, but it's a very interesting question. We actually discussed some of this when we talked about Shabbos and inviting a person to be Mechal Shabbos, or which there is different, because it's not that you're being Mechal Shabbos. Your sin, if you will, is facilitating or encouraging, and there we have a whole question, and a lot of we discussed at the time that for this matter, on one hand, a person desecrating Shabbos that's not observant can come to observe Shabbos. So this is maybe a process of growth. But even then, we discussed that many poskim say you need to provide that individual lodging over Shabbos. They don't have to accept it, because otherwise it's on you. But if you're able to accommodate them, then how they get there and what they do is a different story. And it's a complicated question, and there are different poskim had different viewpoints. Chabad in practice generally errs on a more lenient side, because generally speaking, one of the great ways to help people avoid intermarriage and being lost entirely to their people is starting with experiencing Shabbos, and that is really a primary reason why in Chabad shuls many times you'll hear we don't tell people to drive, but we will tell them that we're not going to ask how you got there, because better the person should. Well, anyways, yes,
Rabbi.
Yes,
It's really a practical question. Bernie will back me up. Do you save the life of someone who's suicidal?
yeah. I think especially with modern awareness about mental health, being in a state, being suicidal is in a sense a malady that's driving them in that place. So certainly we would be Mechal Shabbos to help that person who's most likely not in a healthy.
Not to say he's going to kill himself anyway. Forget about it.
No. I don't.
So what about the two guys who are running away from the bear?
You have to hope the bear is suicidal.
All righty. Shalom Ber Chumash. Dearest friends, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful Shabbos. We'll see you Monday.
Thank you.
Hey,
Hey, Shekoyah, good Shabbos.
Shabbos, Koyach.